Sunday morning on BBC Radio Scotland.
Hello and welcome to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua. Coming up between now and 10, I'll be chatting with Baroness Shami Chakrabarti about how inequality, authoritarianism and AI are putting human rights under pressure. I'll be hearing about the role women played in protests throughout recent history. Palestinian chef, restaurateur and food writer Sami Tamimi, co-author of best-selling books Ottolenghi and Jerusalem, will join me later this hour to discuss his spiritual life. Plus, later on,
Elon Musk, who I have to say, in my opinion, is one of the most dangerous men on the planet. He is not accountable to anybody. He has vast wealth at his fingertips and disposal, and he uses it for some of the most wicked evil I've seen.
Former First Minister Humza Yousaf speaking about ex-owner Elon Musk in the wake of unrest across British cities. We'll be asking, do social media giants have a moral responsibility to clean up our online spaces? First though, let's kick things off with a little bit of music. Now, has a world of increasing inequality, authoritarianism, expanding AI and social media pushed human rights to breaking point? Well, this Tuesday at the Edinburgh International Book Festival, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti will be part of a conversation examining the threats to human rights in the 21st century. Her recent book, Human Rights, The Case for Defence, shines a light on how these rights evolved and how they are under pressure. And Shami joins me now. Welcome to the show, Shami. Lovely to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Zara. Good morning to you.
Great to see you. Now, your book goes right back to the very roots of human rights. And I wondered if you could just give us a brief sort of overview of how those were first established.
Well, I think it's really important to say that this wasn't just invented after World War II, which is something that people think, because, of course, that is the important moment where the world came together after the horrors of the Holocaust, of World War II, and so on, and decided to set an international framework. But the roots go much, much further back to people's struggles all over the world. Now, of course, before modern communications, before even 20th century airline travel and so on, people were to some extent struggling in their particular homes and nation states against kings and dictators and so on. But the values run very deep. Some would say back to the fall of Babylon, back to Magna Carta, and people's struggles against tyranny all over the world. And it's important to remember that. And that's why some of us believe that these are the values on which decent society anywhere rests. That's the values of dignity, of equality, of fairness and freedom. And of course, these then get distilled into all the rights that some of us just take for granted: free speech, fair trials, personal privacy, equal treatment, no degrading treatment, and so on.
You've mentioned there taking them for granted. It seems like they've been very hard to win, these rights. It's taken a long time to get us to where we are. So do you think we're sort of losing sight of the importance of them? And why is that?
I think that's right. I think there's a certain kind of rights nationalism that believes that rights are just for ourselves or people like us or people in our own nation, that seeks to move away from the idea that they're universal. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, in England, we've seen that very graphically in recent years in the rise of a certain kind of politics and a certain kind of sloganeering about immigration in particular. And I think to some extent we are reaping the bitter harvest of that in the disturbances, the lawless far-right initiated disturbances that we've seen on some of our streets over the last so many days.
And obviously during these moments of riots and the protests and the things that we have seen in recent days, as you've just mentioned there's the discussion about facial recognition technology. This comes up. It seems to come up all the time when we're discussing riots, or there is a period of civic unrest. What are your thoughts on this sort of technology? Because I mean, first of all, I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, and in particular this section, which I think helps us to sort of understand big tech and how big tech in particular does benefit from times like the unrest that we have seen and we are continuing to see at the moment.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, chapter 5 of my book is about the way that human rights might offer us a path through the challenges of big tech and advanced technologies. Now, some of this stuff is incredibly exciting, but we need to remember who owns it and who is monetizing it and for whom. And I think sometimes of the internet even as a sort of new continent, but a bit like a Wild West that isn't properly governed by law yet. And that means that we've got big tech emperors, really. They are the new imperium who think they can buy and sell whole countries. They're more powerful than politicians. And they've created social media platforms in a way that allows them literally to monetize controversy. And the greatest controversy is hate-filled. And so we've seen the way, for example, in recent times, that people like Elon Musk are very happy for social media to go largely unpoliced, and for people to incite hate on those platforms. And I think what we're going to need to do in the not too distant future is to do as they did in the 1940s and come together around the world and have treaties to make, because this is international stuff, to have treaties so that democratic governments come together to police the internet. But in the meantime, I think there are things that regions and groups of countries and even domestic governments can do. And we've seen some movement towards that in the EU with their new AI Act. But on the other side of the equation, we also see we see advanced algorithms being used for things like facial recognition technology. Now, when you see terrible criminality being committed and you see it caught on camera, whether that's news cameras or whether that's people's mobile phones, I don't have in principle a problem with matching the face of the thug or the criminal with what their identity might be. But at the moment in the UK, this stuff is not properly regulated by law. And so we've also seen police forces getting into contracts with private companies of their choice, setting up watch lists. We don't get to regulate them. Parliament has had no say in this. And that creates great dangers of false matches, particularly in relation to black and brown people and women in particular. And so, again, what we need is to regulate this technology democratically, with the rule of law.
I mean, it comes as no surprise, obviously, that you are looking for more legislation because, of course, that is your background. And I just wanted to highlight, obviously, today we have played out a clip from Humza Yousaf, the former First Minister of Scotland, in which he does very much determine or state that Elon Musk, he perceives as a threat with the amount of power he has, the use of social media and those platforms at the moment. And as you've mentioned there, we wanted to dig into the international treaty that you've suggested, because I feel that we're having this conversation all the time, Shami. What can we do about social media? It's something that parents worry about, anyone that has children or people that they are really concerned of their safety online. Anyone who uses social media is aware of how algorithms are being used, or certainly sees how those algorithms are used. What does an international treaty sort of look like? Because in your book you discuss the international treaty and obviously domestic legislation as well that needs to be introduced. So can you just paint a fuller picture for us and what that looks like?
Well, I think that, traditionally, and certainly since just after World War II, when we started creating a body of international law, we worked on the basis that international law, including human rights law, binds nation states. So if your rights are being violated, the target for your redress is the Scottish government, the UK government. These are the states who are responsible. But in the 21st century, we now have these empires that are even bigger than nation states, and they are international corporations, including in big tech, but not just in big tech. We've got fossil fuel companies, we've got big pharmaceutical companies, and so on. And I think we're heading for a moment where these corporations, which have become so big, more powerful than governments, they need to be more directly answerable to human rights principles and laws too. Because, for example, online, people are being degraded, they are being discriminated against, they are being treated unfairly, they are having their privacy intruded upon. So all of these rights are being regularly violated online. Now, of course, there is more that our own governments can do. And we've heard, again in recent days, that there's going to be, I hope, a firmer approach towards this in the wake of what's happened. The previous UK government had a rather cosy relationship with big money and big corporations. So there's more that governments can do. But I think in the end, we need a treaty that says that corporations need to be more directly accountable for their human rights violations. Now, that's what we do at the international level, but I think there are things we can do at the domestic level too, including creating special judicial processes that mean that at times social media companies can be ordered to remove content, and they can be ordered to block people who are inciting violence and disorder and so on.
And also, so this book you've co-authored, you do touch on an AI. Tell us about the challenges.
I co-authored it, by the way. I authored it all by myself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. Thank you.
No, but the important point there is that on Tuesday, I'm in discussion with another writer, another human rights lawyer,
and that's Susan Allegri. Yes.
And she's written a book that's very sympathetic to my own, and hers is called Human Rights Robot Wrongs. So
and this is where the connection is.
That's where the connection is, as well as a connection of values, of course.
So can you tell us then about AI and how that will impact, how you see that changing and presenting challenges in the future?
So what we've got with AI is a situation now where increasingly incredibly important decisions about all of our lives are being made by this technology. That could be decisions about whether you get insured, whether you get a job interview, and so on. It's even being used in the criminal justice system, for example, with facial recognition. In the US, it's used for sentencing decisions. This is very, very serious stuff. Now, the problem is that the AI is governed by computer code, not legal code, and we can't see it. It's not transparent, and it's owned by private companies, not necessarily by governments who are accountable. And so the black box is sealed. We don't own it, and we don't know what the criteria are for these decisions that are being made about our lives. And so once more, what we need is to take public democratic control of this technology and decide when it is appropriate to use it and when it isn't. Make sure that it's transparent and make sure that we have redress. So that because the danger of this technology is that it bakes in every inequality and injustice that we already have in our society, because it's been designed by a group of people, most of them in Silicon Valley, most of them white men, and they've designed it in a way that bakes in all the stereotypes and all the injustices that already exist in the world. And so it really does require some attention by government. I think in some cases government should develop its own AI and own it and not let it be totally privatized and ungoverned. But at the very least, we need to open up the black box and see what the basis of all these vital decisions is.
I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing all your insights this morning and just absolutely love the book. Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And Shami's book, Human Rights, The Case for the Defence, is out now, published by Penguin. And you can also see Shami alongside fellow author Susan Allegri, as we mentioned there. That's on Tuesday at 5 p.m. at the Edinburgh International Book Festival. You can check out their website for details. Now, in a moment, I'll be hearing from the writer and performer of a show at this year's Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, exploring the stories of the women at the heart of the protest movements and peace camps throughout history. And later this hour, we'll hear about the spiritual life of Chef Sami Tamimi. But now, an appropriate song for our times from Dionne Warwick.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. But what the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains enough to climb. There are oceans and rivers enough to cross, enough to last till the end of time. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another meadow. There are cornfields and wheat fields enough to grow. There are sunbeams and moonbeams enough to shine. Oh, listen, Lord, if you want to know what the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. What the world.
This summer, immerse yourself in the world's greatest classical music festival. From the epic Holst and Beethoven to Sam Smith reimagined and a symphonic Florence and the Machine. The BBC Proms. Watch on iPlayer, listen on BBC Sounds.
Welcome to Radio 1, we entertain the nation. We're thin, we're fat, we're gay, we're bold, it's a PC celebration. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in the morning. Tune in and have some fun with us, cause all the rest are boring. The Chris Moyle Show, thanks to Ian in Warrington. BBC Radio 1.
You're listening to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua. Now, it's a very quiet time of the morning here in Edinburgh, but just give it a few hours and the capital will be absolutely buzzing with artists and performers, the shows across the festival. And one of those is my next guest, whose show, Gay's Peace, highlights the fascinating and often untold stories of women who stood up in the name of peace. Morna Burden is a performer, singer and activist, and I'm absolutely delighted that she's here with me in the studio. Welcome to the show, Morna. Lovely to have you with us. Now, Gay's Peace, it combines song and storytelling. Can you just give us a little sense of the show and what it's about?
Yeah, well, originally I did another show called Bonnie Fechters, which was a wider focus, and that was about women of courage. And one of the stories in that was about women who'd been imprisoned in the Vietnam War, and about the help and sustenance they got from knowing that the peace movement outside was there and fighting on their behalf. And so that then made me want to do a peace show, and this is a whole collection of songs and stories gathered from a wide variety of places, some women who people might have heard of, many who they won't have heard of, who have just been quietly getting on and trying to make this world a more peaceful place.
So give us a sense of then who you have featured that people would know of.
Well, one of them was actually surprised that was Marlene Dietrich, and obviously we know about her as a singer, but what I hadn't realised was how much work she did during World War II to look after dissidents and Jews who had escaped Germany, to house French and German refugees, and then, of course, to sing to the troops all over the world. But one of the things that she did was that she'd been asked by the Nazis to star in a propaganda film, The Third Reich, and she refused. And that's when she started to do her other work to support people who were in need of help during the war. She was then touring around USA, Africa, Italy, UK, and then she went back into Germany. Mm-hmm. Now, in Germany at that time, there was reputedly a 7-figure sum on her head for her capture.
Well, and was this because she turned down the film?
That's absolutely
right.
Wow. Yeah. And in spite of that, she went back in to entertain the troops there. And when she was asked why she did that, why she risked doing that, she just sort of, very much in her way, she just went, out of decency. You know, and I think that's what a lot of the stories are about. They're about defiance, but the core of it, almost across the board, is just decency, just looking after other people and knowing the difference between right and wrong.
I mean, it must have been quite a challenge for you to select women for this, because there are, of course, so many throughout history. What about some of the women you have featured in this that we wouldn't know of?
Yes, I mean, there are lots and lots and lots of stories, and you gather them from all over the place. One woman that I hadn't heard of, although she's a singer-songwriter, a Scottish singer-songwriter, Nancy Nicholson, and she'd been living in her croft in Caithness when she heard that a nuclear reactor was going to be built near where she lived, and she wasn't very happy about that. So one of the ways that she protested was by singing, by creating a song called Christmas Carol. That you know, it's just her way of expressing her disagreement with what was happening around her.
I mean, there's obviously some wonderful stories. You've chosen ones there that clearly could be turned into songs, and you can see how that is transferred. There was you know, a lot of people will be familiar with the Nobel Peace Prize, but perhaps not the women who sort of pushed the chemist Alfred Nobel in that direction. He wasn't always known for peace work, was he?
Well, no. I mean, there was a woman, Bertha von Suttner, and she applied for a job working for this man, and she was to be his secretary and housekeeper. Turned out that man was Alfred Nobel, who actually was the inventor of dynamite. And although she didn't stay working with him for all that long, they went on to have a lifelong friendship, and it's partly his guilty conscience about what happened with dynamite, but a lot of it her complete lobbying over many years to try to get him to create a Nobel Peace Prize, and that's what he did. As it happened, she was the first woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and this is the way these stories link, and it's what I love. When I was at Adelaide Fringe, it so happened that another Nobel Peace Prize winner came to see my show, Dr. Ruth Mitchell, who she received the Peace Prize in 2017 for her work with the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. Mm-hmm. So that's what I love, is these different links between a woman in 1843 and then suddenly I'm in Australia and find another woman in 2017. And it is these links that really matter, and that's a lot of the strength of the peace movement and these activist movements, is just people doing something.
And how did you bring all these stories together? Because we love talking about them. I in particular love hearing about these women that we may or may not know of, but quite difficult to thread a story or to thread them together for a show, I would imagine.
Well, yes, I mean, that's partly just finding ways to thread them together. I mean, and one of the ways would be, for example, when things were happening in 1958, when Nancy Nicholson was writing her song about about nuclear power. Then at the same time, there were children in Japan that same year, and they had gathered money to create a monument in memory of the children who'd been killed in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So that was, you know, that's the link. It was the date there. That's the link. There are other links. in terms of, as I say, the decency factor, you know, just discovering stories that what's called ordinary women, and then you hear their story. I was in a bar speaking to somebody about this show, telling her that I was gathering stories about women peace activists, and she just quietly said, "Oh, I might have a bit of a story," and she certainly did. It's a long story, so I'm not going to hear. But so some of the time it was just coincidence, because once you've framed it, once you're going, I'm looking at peace, I'm looking at women, then people have their stories. They just do.
And why did you feel it was important to tell this now? Why bring it to the Fringe this year?
Well, I've done it before, because sadly war is pretty what's the word? It keeps going. So therefore,
prevalent, yeah.
Well, not just, it is prevalent, but it's gone on for quite a long time, hasn't it? War. But the thing is, so has peace. But peace doesn't get quite so much publicity. So there are statues about war throughout the world, but there are also peace poles throughout the world. 250,000 of them throughout the world. And one of the stories is from Allenton Peace Sanctuary in Dumfries, where they have close links with the peace pole movement. So I think it comes back to focusing on, you know, if you focus on women, you'll find stories about women. If you focus on stories about war, you'll find stories about war. Focus on peace, you'll find stories about peace and songs.
And this has sort of prompted other people as well to come to you and share their stories. Isn't it funny how that happens when you put something out there, the people that want to connect and share their stories? Tell us about some of the connections you've made.
Well, I think one of the loveliest ones. What happens is, because people, I say cheerio to people at the end of my show. I go and stand at the door and thank them for coming. It only seems polite. And so they want to start to tell their stories. And one of the times that I was doing this show, a young man came back, and he just over the heads, he was very tall, over the heads of the rest of the people that were standing talking to me, said, "Oh, you told my mum's story, thank you." And I don't actually know what that particular story was, but there he was. And so that if you start telling stories, people will tell stories, and then that thread will continue. And that's what I have found, is that, everyone who's come to my show, they'll all have stories. And that has been my experience since I've done this show and my other show, Bonnie Fechters. It just so happens that I select a certain number of stories, but there's no protagonist in my stories, because in a sense we're all protagonists.
And which of all of the women that you do feature in this, do you think has the most, or one of the most sort of memorable or compelling stories that people come to you and say, "Gosh, I didn't know about that," or, you know, it's something that they had forgotten about, or something that just really connected with them?
That's almost impossible to answer.
Is it really?
And in fact, funnily enough, I was just looking through some. What I do is that I get people to write immediately afterwards, to write down any stories they might have or their comments about the show.
Wonderful.
You know, I'll do the usual thing about social media. Please tell people to come and see my show. But what I'm also interested in is, what's your story and what's your reaction to this story? And that is, in fact, this is in my other show, unfortunately, but I'm just going to tell you anyway. I was just looking through the cards, and I'd mentioned about Women's Aid, and that's a different kind of peace story. Yeah. And a woman there said, Women's Aid saved my life. And, so there you go. And so that will be a very true story for many women. And so I think with the peace movement, then I think, again, there are so many. I think what the peace movement did was, and it does change people's lives. And there's a woman called Helen John who was at Greenham Common, and what she spoke about was that she was just what they call an ordinary woman. Well, she said I was just an ordinary woman. But, who is the ordinary person? Who's the extraordinary? All depends.
You do find that extraordinary people do tend to believe themselves to be perfectly ordinary, don't they?
Absolutely. And in a sense they are. And it's the fact that they are ordinary and do extraordinary things, that's the bit that is I think my show is about hope. That's what it's about. It appears to be about war, it appears to be about peace, and it is. But it's also about the fact that one of the things that Helen John said was, you can't suddenly get up one morning and think, I'm going to stop a nuclear war. But in effect, that's exactly what you can do. And what she was saying really was, every single tiny thing that's done makes a difference.
Morna, thank you so much for joining us this morning to tell us about your show. And Morna's show, Gaze Peace, is at the Scottish Storytelling Centre in Edinburgh at 5:30pm today, Wednesday the 14th and Sunday the 18th. Music now from one of Scotland's finest contemporary singer-songwriters. This is Rachel Sermani.
C'est si bon de partir n'importe où, bras dessus, bras dessous, en chantant des chansons. C'est si bon de se dire des mots doux, de petits rien du tout, mais qui en disent en langue, en voyant notre mine ravie. Les passants dans la rue nous envient. C'est si bon de gaieté dans ses yeux, une esprit merveilleux qui donnait le frisson. C'est si bon, ces petites sensations, ça vaut mieux que millions. C'est tellement, tellement bon. C'est bon. Voilà, c'est bon. Les passants dans la rue, bras dessus, en chantant des chansons. Quel esprit merveilleux. C'est bon. Je cherche un millionnaire avec des grands Cadillac cars, mink coats, des bijoux jusqu'au cou, tu sais. C'est bon. Ces petites sensations. Peut-être quelqu'un avec un petit yacht, non? Oh, c'est bon. C'est bon, c'est bon. Vous savez bien que j'attends quelqu'un qui pourrait m'apporter beaucoup de loot. Ce soir, demain, la semaine prochaine, n'importe quand. C'est bon, si bon. Il sera très crazy, non? Voilà, c'était mon bon.
Now you're listening to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua, and coming up at 10 o'clock here on BBC Radio Scotland is the Sunday Show. And Fiona Stocker joins me now to share what's coming up. Very good morning, Fiona.
Morning, Zara. Yes, well, first of all, we'll be looking, of course, at the violent riots and demonstrations which had engulfed parts of England and Northern Ireland for more than a week. They seem to have dissipated. The violence began, of course, after the 3 girls were murdered in Southport around about 10 days ago. That unrest, of course, spread quickly across towns and cities in England and even reached Belfast, but not, thankfully, in Scotland. I'm going to be speaking to CoCamp Stewart. She was the first woman of colour to be elected to the Scottish Parliament back in 2021. Also the first woman of colour to serve as a minister in the Scottish Government, getting her reaction to events. I've been speaking to last week members of ethnic minority communities here in Scotland who said that although there was no unrest and we didn't see the same scenes, they felt very nervous and anxious about setting foot outside the front door. So we're going to be looking at that in a lot more detail. Also, of course, it is the final day of the Olympics. We have got 13 gold medals left to go. So we're going to be talking to a reporter in Paris to see what the buzz is like in the final day. Also to Susan Egglestaff, who's a former Olympian herself. And we're going to be talking to a sports psychologist as well. So we're diving deeply into everything that's happening in the Olympics. We'll also get the latest from Ukraine. President Zelensky has for the first time confirmed that there has been incursions into Russia. And we'll also be looking at something that's called World Con. Now, I'm in the studio at the moment on the Clyde in Glasgow, Zara, and over the last few days there's been some quite amazing sights, because it's basically a science fiction convention. So it was the Masked Ball last night. So we're going to be talking to a couple of science fiction writers and the vice chair of this year's convention just to find out how the event's gone, what's the appeal for people. I'm not a huge science fiction fan, I don't know if you are, but there are legions of fans, as you'll know.
And you'll get a very good view from PQ, I would imagine.
It's fantastic, yes. It's been really interesting the last few days. So we're going to be doing that, and then we're going to pop across to the Fringe in Edinburgh, where our arts correspondent Paula McLean will be bringing us the very latest. So, yes, an eclectic mix as always.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Fiona. We'll look forward to that just after 10 o'clock. And just to mention, obviously after 9 o'clock, we have our very own Faith Forum, in which we'll be talking and touching upon some of those issues that Fiona mentioned there and some of the stories they'll be covering, in particular the unrest following the Southport attacks. But before then, it is 8:43 a.m. Let's take a little bit of music now. This is Crowded House with Fall at Your Feet.
And I feel like I'm moving inside her, lying in the dark. And I think that I'm beginning to know her. Let it go, I'll be there when you call. And whenever I fall at your feet, you let your tears rain down on me. Whenever I touch your slow turning pain, you're hiding from me now. There's something in the way that you're talking. The words don't sound right, but I hear them all moving inside you. No, I'll be waiting when you call. Hey, whenever I fall at your feet, you let your tears rain down on me. Whenever I touch your slow turning pain, the finger of blame has turned upon itself, and I'm more than willing to offer myself. Do you want my presence or need my help? Who knows where that might lead? I fall. Whenever I fall at your feet, you let your tears rain down on me. Whenever I fall, whenever I fall.
That was Crowded House with Fall at Your Feet. Now, theologian Amna Wadud was the daughter of a Christian minister but converted to Islam. We spoke to her about what music inspires her.
Peace in the struggle to find peace. I find I often come back to this quotation because, number one, I'm a words person. As a young person, I was really into reading, and I could hold myself up for long periods of time in a book and examine the world as it unfolded between these words. And this led me to having a one-on-one experience with the Quran just in English in the early part of my identity as a Muslim. And eventually it led me to a place where I challenged how words were used to allow for women their full agency, participation, spirituality, and identity within Islam. Sometimes when I look at my grandchildren and I see them doing what children do to make themselves the center of attention, I look them in the eye and I say to them, yes, you are the center of the universe, and so is everyone else. And I think this statement from Sarah McLachlan reminds me of that, because peace becomes a dynamic as well as a goal. I want my grandchildren to experience peace and love in their lives, and yet I want them to understand that they also must be vehicles of peace for others. And certainly from a child's perspective, it's one of the first things that you would forget, because kids are so egocentric, and in fact that's their nature, that's part of their survival. But what I'm hoping to do with this statement about them in relationship to the universe is to infuse in them this grand sense of connectivity with the source that in some faith traditions we call God or Allah or Goddess, and connectivity to the earth, the planet that sustains us, from which we come and to which we return, and in cooperation with other people. And yet I don't want to diminish the flame, the very light and spark that each child brings with them into the world from their first moment until their last. I want them to be inspired to consider themselves as an important part of that process. So I focus on them and I affirm them with the greatest statement that I can think of, while at the same time encouraging them to understand that it is part of a life trajectory and that it is not something that is exclusive to them.
All the fear has left me now. I'm not frightened anymore. It's my heart that pounds beneath my flesh. It's my mouth that pushes out this breath.
Sometimes a word can inspire you to move forward, and sometimes a word can break your heart. So when I think about this statement in this song, peace in the struggle to find peace, it lets me know that we are all a part of a process, the process of living, and that things unfold and sometimes they collapse, and sometimes the phoenix rises up from the ashes and the ashes are blown away by the wind. But still, when we have breath, we have the opportunity to try again. So I find it aspiring to arrive at a place where even when the world can be tumultuous, that I live in peace because my goal is peace. And that I have for every living being on the planet, and in fact the earth herself, a desire for that peace to also reign supreme.
I won't
myself practice meditation along with my Islamic rituals as a way to be able to concentrate on being a vehicle for peace by arriving and sustaining peace within myself, even as I walk in a world of revolt or war or strife or difficulty. So peace is the goal and peace is the method. And so I like this statement from Sarah McLachlan, as with her beautiful voice. It reminds me not only of the goal, but of the way that I should be in order to arrive at that goal and to share it with all others.
Wow, well, that was Amna Wadud speaking there about what inspires her. Now, you're listening to Sunday Mornings with me, Zara Janjua. Earlier in the programme, we spoke to Baroness Shami Chakrabarti about how inequality, authoritarianism and AI are putting human rights under pressure. If you missed any of that, you can catch up on BBC Sounds. Just search for Sunday Mornings. But now, a track for all the 90s teens out there. Here's TLC with Unpretty. That was TLC with Unpretty. Now, coming up after 9.
Elon Musk, who I have to say, in my opinion, is one of the most dangerous men on the planet. He is not accountable to anybody. He has vast wealth at his fingertips and disposal, and he uses it for some of the most wicked evil I've seen.
That was Hamza Yusuf speaking this week in the wake of the worst unrest across the UK in more than a decade. Well, so does ex-owner Elon Musk have a moral responsibility to make online spaces less harmful for society? We'll be discussing that later on with my guests, author Rog Glass, writer and performer Fiona Stewart, and global citizenship specialist Dr. Jehan Al-Azawi. We'll also be asking, in the wake of recent unrest, how can communities live with difference? And as we're in the middle of the world's largest arts festival in Edinburgh, what role can art and stories play in helping us understand ourselves and connect with each other? That's after the news, sport and weather here on BBC Radio Scotland. And taking us there is a track from Edinburgh's Hamish Hawk, whose new album A Firmer Hand is out next week. Here's the Mauritanian badminton champion 1973.
I'll need a ballpoint pen. It'll sound like Common People sung by Christopher Wren on an upright piano with nice narrow keys in a Glaswegian chapel or a Parisian library. And as I sing I watch you diving into a swimming pool that shines like a screen, and I call out, isn't this living? And I call out, isn't this living? And you call back, it's living. And you call back, it's living the dream. I see my family in an ugly cemetery. Two of them have been crying, two have shovels at the ready. And I'd be lying if I said I'd foreseen this. I'd prefer to burn my body in Varanasi. As I burn, I watch you driving into a swimming pool that shines like a screen, and I call out, isn't this living? And I call out, isn't this living? And you call back, it's living.
Now, this is Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua. Coming up between now and 10, I'll be exploring some of the big news stories of the past week and digging a little bit deeper to reveal what they tell us about ourselves, our faith, and of course the communities we live in. Joining me this morning in our Edinburgh studio are Dr. Jehan Al-Azawi, a teacher of global citizenship and trade unionist with the Educational Institute of Scotland; Fiona Stewart, writer, performer and founder of Christian arts charity Foolproof; and down the line from Glasgow, Rog Glass, author, editor and senior lecturer in creative writing at the University of Strathclyde. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Morning.
Lovely to have you with us. Now, with parts of the UK experiencing some of the worst unrest they've seen in a decade, we're going to be exploring how communities, which seemingly are more divided than ever, can live with difference. And given the huge role, of course, that social media has played in spreading misinformation and stoking tensions, we'll be asking, do social media companies have a moral responsibility to care for and clean up online spaces? If X, formerly known as Twitter, is our meeting place online, then I guess how do we balance freedom of speech with safety? And of course, earlier in the programme, I was chatting to Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, who did mention this, and I'm sure we'll pick up on some of that a little bit later on in the chat. And as the world's largest arts festival dominates Edinburgh this month, we'll be looking at the power of the arts to help us explore what it is to be human and perhaps connect with others. And talking of the festival, just a little reminder, of course, that next week's show will be live from BBC's site at Dynamic Earth in the heart of the festival. And one of the many guests who will be appearing is the writer Afia Campbell. Now, it's been almost 2 weeks since the fatal stabbing of 3 children in Southport. In the wake of that horrific attack, the UK has seen the worst unrest in more than a decade, with violent clashes against police and attacks on mosques and accommodation housing asylum seekers. Former First Minister Humza Yousaf spoke earlier this week about how anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim sentiments have led him to question his family's future in the UK. And with the division the riots have revealed, how do we move forward from here? How do communities live with difference? Or do we have a responsibility to engage with it? Well, here to discuss are writer and performer Fiona Stewart, global citizenship teacher Dr. Jehan Al-Azawi, and Roger Glass, an author. So, Rog, let's come to you first. Now, you were brought up in the north of England and you actually lived near Southport, didn't you, where this violence began? So looking in on these events from the last week, particularly from your home where you are in Glasgow, how do you reflect on what you've seen? Is it a case of just people not being tolerant, or, is there a difference in communities?
Well, yeah, I know these communities pretty well. I've lived in them for a long time. And the first thing I want to say really about this is that I feel like when we're setting the terms for these conversations, we should remember that largely we are not more divided than ever. Largely we are a multicultural society that works incredibly well on a day-to-day level in the real world, online. What's happening at the moment makes us feel like everything is broken, and there's good reason for that, because it's shocking and awful and people are anguished for good reason about what it means. It's good that we're reflecting on that. But my experience of those communities over many years is not that they are absolutely riven with division and that communities are unable to live with each other. It's the absolute opposite. And in fact, in many of those places, as has been quite widely commented upon, it's often not people from those places who are directly involved in some of those acts, at least. It doesn't mean that the issues shouldn't be faced, but I think that we in many ways do an excellent job of living in a multicultural society, and partially one of the things I think we should be a little bit wary of is allowing people who are often internationally based, who are ill-informed, and who are working with social media algorithms and often a lot of power and money. We shouldn't allow those people to set the terms of how we discuss what's happening in our societies and how we make sense of it.
Raj, I appreciate you've come in with this sort of celebration of multiculturalism there. Jehan, you wonder, if you can reflect a little bit on, some of the comments, particularly one from First Minister John Swinney, who said earlier this week that violence and Islamophobia have no place in Scotland. And certainly, and I'm very much touching wood when I say this, there seems to have been no outbreak of rioting so far up here. Are you still feeling quite vigilant?
Absolutely, and fellow colleagues and ethnic minorities in Scotland are very much on edge, and there have been small incidents of racial abuse reported in different places in Scotland. So it's really important that we are not complacent. There is racism in Scottish society as well that needs addressing, and I think yesterday also there was a really strong showing of that Scottish community. There were anti-racist demonstrators out on the streets helping to remind everybody that we won't stand for this kind of disorder and racism in Scotland, but that we need to have these similar conversations that are happening in England and elsewhere in the UK, because there's very much the potential, I think, for that sort of thing to happen in Scotland.
Fiona?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. I was thinking about the fact that I was away last week. I was down in Southampton, actually, when all of this was kicking off, and I was staying with friends and holidaying, so I wasn't as engaged with the news as I probably am when I'm, living in my flat in Glasgow and listening to lots of different podcasts and, engaging with things. So in the run-up to coming in this morning, I thought, I don't feel very informed about all of this, and I don't feel I'm on top of it. And that actually gave me pause to think, why should I feel I'm on top of it? Is it because actually our news cycle and particularly the role of social media, it's making us feel anxious and we have to engage. But really it's not engagement. it's just hearing other people's opinions and it's being fed stuff. So it was making me reflect on what does engagement mean for me? What does engagement mean? It probably means actually taking heart and joining in with people who are standing up against racism and saying, well, actually, this is not who we are as Scotland, as the UK. This is not what the majority of people believe to be the way. But engagement, I personally can slip into the habit of thinking engagement is just staying informed. But actually, where are my sources of information coming from? So, I think that's what we've seen, is that there's information coming into people that is fake, that is malicious.
But Fiona, is engagement really then having to understand where this comes from? Because I think, we've seen a lot of people class these as far-right rioters, for example, but actually it's far-right incited.
Correct, yeah.
But the rioters themselves, who are they? What's motivating them to do this?
And that's what's been surprising, hasn't it? When you've seen these photographs of these people caught on CCTV, and they do look pretty shocked that suddenly there's justice. But, because it's been stirred up by malicious that I think there's an economic thing to this, so there's cost of living, people are anxious. I'm not in any way defending the cause of those who've been out rioting at all, because I think it's thoroughly wrong, but I can understand, where I start to think a little bit more deeply than just that sort of surface level observing the news. You think, well, you can see why people get stirred up and they get anxious, and therefore they're vulnerable and prone to those far right incitements.
Let's bring Rog in here. Rog, your thoughts? Are the people rioting really just disenfranchised? Are they the disenfranchised?
Maybe. I don't know. But what I do think is that we spend a lot of time speculating about what this small amount of people might think and how we might sort of make them feel better or more at ease, rather than... And that's completely understandable, and particularly when our world in real life and online is absolutely flooded with shocking images, and most people then feel they have to sort of try and make sense of what those individuals feel. I don't know. But what I do know is that we can't solve it in 15 minutes by trying to work out what those people want. And in a much broader sense, over the last 10 or 15 years, both politically in Scotland and in the UK, but also in a much bigger international sense, online, our culture has so radically changed. And the language we use, often in bad faith, around immigration and asylum, two words that have been flattened or conflated often, that the repeated continual use of those, often in social media silos where disinformation is rife, those things are bit by bit creating a situation where something like this was inevitable, in my view. Completely inevitable. What's more surprising is that it hasn't happened sooner, or that it hasn't been bigger. And I want to be clear that I'm not talking it down or saying that it's not important. The absolute opposite. I just think that what we're dealing with here is something that we've kind of avoided facing for about 10 or 15 years in any honest way. But what have we done to language around immigration and asylum? And why are we continually framing our debates around what a small amount of people who are attacking others and using violence kind of want? So just one, I'm not going to overload you with statistics, but I'm going to stick to just one, which is that only 6% of the people that come into the UK do so illegally.
Yes.
And yet almost all of the debate around immigration / asylum and conflating those two terms is about somehow this being a huge problem. Everybody else, 94%, have got an invite and they're keeping our society afloat. We have been continually engaging with and trying to make sense of what, quote unquote, these people want for years, but doing it in bad faith in a really narrow way. And I think this is an opportunity for us to be more honest about how our society has changed, particularly since our absolute online explosion, the way that we understand and experience the world, and to say we've looked away from this thing. What we need to do is to make a much more confident, well-informed, bold case for the society in which we live and how it operates.
Yeah, Jehan is nodding.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with that earlier point that Roger just made there about that these could have been a lot bigger, and that there was a degree of inevitability to this kind of unrest, because I think what that social unrest reflects is the state of our national political discourse and what that's been like, and the complete absence of integrity and accountability at the heart of our politics, and leadership at the national level matters so much. And we've had a total absence of effective leadership and good governance for more than a decade. And so that has set the scene from, you know, the corruption, dog whistle politics, the politics of diversion and distraction. That's the backdrop to all of this. And I think riots were the inevitable conclusion to that era. It's no coincidence that these have occurred after the election, where there were many elements of society that felt somewhat represented by that sort of politics and the discussion around immigration and Islamophobia. And so they felt suddenly that they'd lost that national representation and were overnight and felt disenfranchised and have sowed that discord. But I would also say that not everybody who is disenfranchised and dispossessed manifests that displeasure with their lot by being racist and rioting. And I think, as we've said, there are external instigators to this unrest that have exploited events as well. But this is the sort of full stop to the change of government, you know, and, you know, I think it was inevitable. And we absolutely need to have a national discussion around what we want our immigration and asylum policy to be. One that has a vision. And, you know, I'm not even currently confident that the new government's able or willing to do this. We've gone from the rhetoric of stop the boats to smash the gangs. And where does compassion and humanity and empathy come into that? Because if you smash the gangs, well, the people that are trying to escape war and persecution and the effects of climate catastrophe, what are we saying about that? We just don't want to hear. We don't want to be any source of help with that. So I'd like to see some more empathy and compassion injected into this discussion. And like Rog said, some reality. So many people are misinformed about the number of asylum seekers. You know, the UK overall takes in about less than 1% of the global population, refugees. Immigration is separate to that. We need to, as a country, decide what we want our immigration policy to be, what skills we need in order to drive the economy. So we really need to have a discussion about immigration that is open and honest.
Fiona, I want to ask then, you know, on the back of the suggestions being made by Jehan, what do we need to do? Is it education? Is it education and, you know, information? Is that going to help these communities come to terms with their differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jehan, what you just said about, you know, about empathy, and I think that comes from getting to know people. And so we need to find ways, I think, to have that dialogue, that conversation. I think you know, and I don't want to be reductive about that, but I think that means, you know, we do get to know people who are different to us. So you know, what Roger said about the silos in social media, we live in silos often in reality as well. Yeah. So how do we create spaces, community spaces? That comes down to the built environment. Or we just keep building lots and lots of housing estates where there's no community gathering space, so people live in the little boxes and, you know, watch the screens. So I think it's about meeting. I think it's about education. I wonder if there's also a place for us to step back as a society and think, what do we actually, where does our ethical basis come from? What do we believe, you know, it means we use the term fundamental British values, but what does that mean? Because we're living in I suppose, a post-Christian world. We are living in a multicultural world, but I think we've sort of almost handed over ethics to each situation by situation, or what I happen to feel in the moment. And I think we need a space. We need places where we can actually talk together, get to know one another, but also decide, well, what do we hold to be true and to be the values that we want to have as a nation? That there's a lot of churn, I think, happening, isn't there, societally?
But, you know, Rog did call it, we're not going to answer or find the solutions necessarily in this discussion. However, I think, you know, there's some really interesting points that have been raised, things to think about. And in terms of education, I also very much appreciate that you've come armed with facts. So thank you very much for sharing them all with us. There is so much to talk about, but we do have to leave that there for now. We're going to be picking up with Rog, Fiona and Jehan in just a moment to ask if social media sites have a responsibility to regulate misinformation online. And later on we'll be discussing the power of art to connect us. But first, let's take some music, and this is Janis Joplin's version of Me and Bobby McGee.
The busted flat in Baton Rouge, waiting for a train, and I was feeling near as faded as my jeans. Bobby thumbed a diesel down just before it rained and rode us all the way to New Orleans. I pulled my harpoon out of my dirty red bandana. I was playing soft while Bobby sang the blues. Windshield wipers slapping time, I was holding Bobby's hand in mine. We sang every song that Javi knew. Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing, I mean nothing, honey, if it ain't free. No, no. Yeah, feeling good was easy, love, when he sang the blues. You know, feeling good was good enough for me. Good enough for me and my Bobby, yeah. From the Kentucky coal mine to the California sun, hey, Bobby shared the secrets of my soul. Through all kinds of weather, through everything that we've done, yeah, Bobby, baby, kept me from the whole. One day up near Selena Sloan, I let him slip away. He's looking for that home, and I hope he finds it. But I trade all of my tomorrows for one single yesterday, to be holding Bobby's body next to mine. Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing, that's all that Bobby left me. But if feeling good was easy loud when he sang the blues, hey, feeling good was good enough for me. Good enough for me and my Bobby, yeah. La da da, la da da da, la da da, la da da da, la da da, la da Bobby, yeah. La da 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 da, la da da da, la da da Bobby, yeah. La da da, la da da, la da da.
That was Janis Joplin with me and Bobby McGee. And tomorrow's afternoon show with Nicola Meehan will have live music from the Janis Joplin story, plus big country and much, much more. Now, Elon Musk, owner of X, formerly Twitter, waded into the conversation about riots across the UK this week by saying civil war is inevitable. But some commentators have responded by saying that more inevitable is the need to deal with extremism and disinformation on social media.
Elon Musk, who I have to say, in my opinion, is one of the most dangerous men on the planet. He is not accountable to anybody. He has vast wealth at his fingertips and disposal, and he uses it for some of the most wicked evil I've seen.
That was former First Minister Humza Yousaf there talking at the Edinburgh Festival about Elon Musk. Analysis, of course, has shown that misinformation played a role in the unrest over the past 2 weeks. So are social media companies doing enough to protect public conversation? Do sites like X have a moral responsibility to protect spaces against misinformation and stoking up tensions? And how do we balance trusted information with the freedoms we've enjoyed online? Well, here to discuss are my guests, Fiona Stewart, Roger Glass and Dr. Jahan Al-Azawi. Jahan, we obviously heard that clip there from former First Minister Humza Yousaf saying that Elon Musk isn't accountable to anyone. There's, a UK Online Safety Act which gives police officers the power to take action against hate speech online. But before it gets to police, is it responsibility of social media companies? Do we have to make them accountable? How much influence do you actually think that someone like Elon Musk actually has?
I absolutely agree with Humza Yousaf's assessment. And actually, before Elon Musk took over X, there was regulation of the platform, but he fired all of those people whose job it was to oversee content and regulate what was being shared. And Twitter was therefore a much more better, more positive space as a result. But wherever human beings gather, the harmonious social relations depend upon the ability to regulate and maintain and enforce law and order. Every nation state in the world, whether democratic or not, has to establish security and the rule of law. You know, the definition of the state in Weberian terms is the monopoly on the legitimate use of force. And yet here we have a space, an online community, where there is effectively that Hobbesian war of all against all. There's, and in that kind of space, mob rule wins. And, you know, it's been really disturbing to watch and see the ability of Elon Musk to stoke the tension and the riot and to goad Keir Starmer online, and you can look at how every time he interacted with a tweet, it expanded the visibility of those tweets, and I think it's really dangerous. And it struck me as though Musk is a kind of Joker character from the Batman movies, where he just seems to really be enjoying sowing chaos. And so that space is completely lawless and absolutely needs much greater regulation and control, as we have in any space where human beings congregate.
Fiona, you seem very much in agreement.
Yeah, I think I am. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we think of these platforms as being value neutral and being, you know, beautiful, safe spaces where everybody has equality of opinion. And to some extent, everybody does have equality of access opinion. That was the glory, I think, of something like Twitter when it first began. But yeah, it is lawless. I'm a big social media fan, and I'm a big advocate for being present in these spaces. But I have to say, this week has brought me to the point of thinking, I think I'm going to come off this. Because I'm not contributing anymore. I'm sitting, I'm scrolling, and actually I'm getting angry, or I'm feeling I'm being sucked into a web of stuff that is really unhealthy and quite poisonous. So it leaves me with that question personally: do I stick around and try and be an influence for the good? But if you're up against Musk, nobody's going to see my tweets. I mean, my mum and, you know, not my mum, she's
I'll
not
give
on Twitter,
them a
but
like
one or
for
two of my
Fiona.
friends, yeah, exactly. But do you know, so the power dynamic is skewed within that space. So I think it does leave us with a question of how much we are complicit with it. How much do we engage in order to try and make a difference? But actually, are we just adding to the?
I mean, it's an incredibly powerful platform.
It's a very
in
powerful
recent
platform.
weeks, we've even seen Biden announce his stepping down from the presidency race. Isn't that right? And so the platform is being used to make official announcements. Rog, you're an author and you're immersed, obviously, in the world of stories. Is this a case of people just believing the story that they want to believe or that fits with their narrative, or, you know, the simple explanations always the ones that work best?
Yeah, sometimes we believe what we want to believe, for sure. And in the choices that we make about who we follow and who we don't follow online, we are creating a world in which we are comfortable that is telling us a particular story. Right? So I choose not to follow Stephen Yaxley Lennon, so I don't know what he's saying. Although the algorithm is still trying to find ways of showing it to me and putting it in front of me, it means that kind of thing is there a lot less. So I think that we do have individual responsibility we need to be aware of about the decisions we make. But there's a far bigger issue that I think could bear a little bit more scrutiny, I think, which is about the way that algorithms work. And we don't need to be tech experts. I'm certainly not a tech expert. But we don't need to be an expert in order to recognise that the algorithm doesn't care about our moral conversations, about the way that we treat people interfaith, or you know, how we are to our families around the table when a discussion gets difficult. What it wants is your time, and it wants your time in order to get your money. And it's looking for our vulnerability, and it's looking for our prejudice, and for the weakest parts of us and our worst instincts, because those things keep us telling ourselves a story we are comfortable with, even in our own prejudice, and I include myself in that, as much as possible. So I think it's a mixture of us taking personal responsibility, and then also there being like hard, concrete things changing in the real world, like laws changing locally, nationally, internationally, online, offline. But also we need to have much more awareness about what we're doing online, because we often feel like, I say we here as if I'm speaking for the whole human race, but I feel like I have some kind of level of control because I choose what to post, right? That's a complete illusion. I might have a small amount of agency, but really I'm operating with lots and lots of things influencing my behavior and my world and my worldview all the time, every single time I scroll, every time I'm moving across platforms, the things that are put in front of me and how they are put in front of me. And that's a big societal, economical series of things that are happening below the surface. And I think if we tell ourselves that somehow we are in control of our own story, which is essentially what social media is trying to do, is to say to you, you have the power, you can have a platform, you can say what you want to say, you share with the world your view. If we just accept that, then we're missing a lot of what we're actually doing online, which is being influenced by those things.
It's interesting you've said time. Time is what these algorithms are dependent on.
Yeah.
Time is the thing. And I wanted to come back to you, Fiona, on that one, because earlier in our last conversation you were talking about the fact that you'd been away and you felt very out of the loop and you didn't know whether news was permeating in the way, and you thought, how do I engage with this? Should I be engaged with news? Is it your protest then to stay away from X? Is it for you is that what we should be looking to do? If you don't like the platform, you vote with your feet.
I mean, I would like to think that would make an enormous difference to Elon Musk and the whole global conversation.
You could start a movement, Fiona.
Start a movement, exactly. But yes, maybe. And I think what you just said there about we don't need to be tech savvy to be aware. That's really true. But I think a lot of people are just not even allowing themselves to be aware. So we're all getting swept along in this. And that's what I recognise in myself from last week, that I can be very easily swept along by this kind of wave of paying attention, giving my attention to the news, giving my attention to people's opinions.
Is there a sort of lack of critical thought being applied? And because, when we are at school and we're learning, we're often asked to write critical essays or to, think critically about subjects. But once we leave and once we enter the working world, we may not be having to do that as often.
Yes, and
I do notice with older relatives, perhaps they'll share one in particular, who I won't name, but who does have a tendency to share articles that I will then say, listen, this isn't actually accurate and it's not from a verified news source, and I have to make sure that the family chat all are aware. But it does make me wonder, where's the critical thought? When did we lose that, Jehan?
Yeah, and also to what extent do people engage? Because I think a lot of people are just scrolling endlessly on Twitter and maybe take in a headline but don't actually click and read or do that further interrogation to see the news source and who the author and all of that. And yes, although schools teach critical thinking skills, it needs to be multimodal, and schools have to keep at pace with the way in which the information and the way that we engage with it is changing. And I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around developing critical literacy skills. So that's also about looking at authors and perspectives and thinking about why they might be writing that or taking that particular position on an issue, and that we actually engage with online content and using that as examples in the classroom to actually, engaging with the media as the young people are now engaging and using it. So yes, but also there's a lot of people that have finished formal schooling a long time ago, and the way that we interact with news and the media has changed in that time.
So much.
So people beyond and outside formal education also need to be taught those critical literacy skills and political literacy. So there's a responsibility on not just the education sector, but all professions and society at large to educate for greater political literacy and critical literacy skills.
Well, I'm sure we could all do with thinking a little bit more before we post, couldn't we? So that's certainly given us something to think about. Thank you so much, Fiona Stewart, Dr. Jehan Al-Azawi and Rog Glass. Coming up, we'll be looking at the power of art. First, though,
answers to happy endings.
The nudie edition.
I am here to help with clues, so if any of you need a clue, just shout clue, please.
Okay.
Question number 1.
Who does that? Yeah, I don't have an artist.
I have clues if anyone needs a clue.
Clue.
Okay, now what are you after? The title or the artist?
No, I'm pretty sure the song's called We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. Correct.
Okay, all right. Let's go with Leeds United players. You've got blank Beckford.
Jermaine. Oh.
And blank Dallas.
Stewart.
So you have...
Jermaine Stewart.
I don't think I've ever known the artist.
No, I don't know that.
Oh, did you need a clue as well?
Well, I wouldn't have had it. I put it's by the...
Oh, doesn't it sound great? Well, of course, as you heard there, next week we will be moving out of this studio as presenter Connie McLaughlin hosts the programme in front of a live studio audience at Dynamic Earth in Edinburgh. Guests include author James Robertson on the Scots language, presenter Terry Christian on his Catholic upbringing, plus live music from folk singer Iona Fife and many more brilliant voices from across the festival. There are just a few tickets remaining, so if you do want to be in the audience, just search online for BBC shows and tours and look out for BBC at the Edinburgh Festivals and then Sunday morning. Now, talking of festivals, what began in the spirit of unity and connection as the Edinburgh International Festival in the wake of the Second World War is, of course, now the Fringe, the world's largest arts festival hosting comedy, theatre, dance, storytelling and acts, big and small, but in the infinite variety of things to see. Is there a common theme? Can the arts and storytelling help us delve into the human experience and find connection and common ground in these divided times? Can it even help us discover who we really are? Well, here to discuss this are my guests, Fiona Stewart, Rog Glass and Jahan Al-Azawi. Fiona, let's come to you, of course, because you are a writer and a performer and you run a Christian arts charity. You've put shows on at the Fringe, haven't you?
I have. I'm a bit rubbish this year, though. I've not seen anything yet, which feels really a bit of a failure at the moment.
Slow start.
Slow start. I know. I'm gonna build up to it. I have put on shows before, and I have tried to do things that are entertaining and joyful, but also, I suppose, say something about what I believe. Without kind of punching people and hitting people in the head. That's not appropriate phrases to use, isn't it, in light of what we've been talking about? But actually, it flows on nicely from what we've been talking about, because I think we sort of think, oh, we're going to talk about the arts now, that's a bit lighter. Actually, I think there's a real power to find connection and to talk about our shared values, to hear about the other, to hear about different perspectives, to discuss ideas. That's the place where we do that. We do find those community spaces to do it. So yeah, I have.
It's interesting to look at that. Then I think there were 3,500 almost shows at the Fringe this year, official shows, and then of course there's all the side festivals and all the other events that are on. So thousands upon thousands. And if there was one thread running through it, is it all about human connection, Rog? You teach creative writing and you're an author. So do the arts have that power to help us explore our
I think so. It certainly does for me. And yes, we talk about that a lot in the kind of classes that I teach at Strathclyde. Every society ever has used storytelling to help to understand ourselves and each other. And from very early childhood, we tell each other and receive stories in order to be able to understand who we are and navigate the world around us. And that is pretty fundamental. Mm-hmm. And it can be treated sometimes as something that's kind of lighter or as kind of irrelevant to the way that we live. I mean, even if you didn't care at all about human connection or empathy or understanding or happiness, it's a huge financial monster at this time of year anyway that makes a huge amount of money. But really, I think the value in it is that all storytelling allows us to imagine ourselves in situations that we have not been in. And I think all human beings are looking for that, whether it's across religion or nationality or class or gender or culture. Particularly now, I think that's important because we can sometimes, for good reason, feel like certain stories aren't our stories to tell, or like that we cannot possibly understand the experiences of people of other races or genders or different types of experience. It's good that we're alert to those kind of things. But one of the things that's eternal about storytelling, that's magical right across genre and form, whether it's theatre or TV or film or books or whatever, or music, all of these allow us to feel closer to other people who are different to us. And that for me is about as fundamental as it can possibly get.
Well, you know, years ago when I joined the BBC Comedy Writers' Room, I'd just written my first screenplay, and at that point we really started to interrogate what it is about storytelling that is universal, what kinds of stories. And I read this one thought, which was every story it has the same premise, and that is a stranger comes to town.
Oh, wow.
And
I love
so,
that.
yeah, I really enjoyed
Yeah.
that. The stranger could be, you know, a shark, let's say if it's Jaws. It could be a twister. It could be, you know, that someone, you know, dies. It could be war. It could be famine. It could be anything. And it really got me thinking about, you know, the universal truths that we all share. We all have changes, things. Everything changes in life. Sometimes that's in our control, sometimes it's out with our control. And it's the way that we respond, the way we react really to those that present the universal truths. Now, Jahan, there's thousands upon thousands of shows, as I mentioned, that bring people together here this month in Edinburgh. You know, is that act of kind of coming together and physically watching a show just as important as what you're watching?
Completely, absolutely. And, you know, in contrast to what we were talking earlier about online spaces, what really helps us to get to know one another and to understand each other is face-to-face interaction, being in a room with people and hearing their story, and completely agree with what's been said about how the arts take us on a journey through people's lived experiences, and their lived experience is so powerful in storytelling, and it builds empathy, it builds understanding, and it's also informative. I love comedy, and that comedy shows are always what I choose.
We should go and see things together. That's my genre as well.
Absolutely love it, but a lot of real knowledge and insight into how people have experienced the world I've gained from watching comedy. Like, my understanding of the African American experience in the United States comes from watching the greats like Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, who gave amazing insight into what it's like to be black in America, while simultaneously just being absolutely hilarious and making it funny. And so people come away not just entertained, but with a lot to actually reflect on after a comedy show as well. So I think it is a really powerful medium.
Raj, I'm going to bring you in here
Sure.
as a creative writer and to ask, you know, obviously Jahan and I are both fans of comedy, bringing a bit of levity to otherwise dark situations. What are you as well? We'll all have a night out with the friends.
Just want to say
Let's all have a night out.
Would be left out. Yeah.
What is it about that common experience, that shared experience? Because you do, when you go to shows, there is this lovely unity and togetherness that you feel at the end. The moments you laugh together, the moments you stop and pause. You know, it's amazing what performers can actually do, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're asking why or how does that work, I think it's that it's a reminder of both our specialness and our commonality at the same time, of our uniqueness, but also the fact that we meaningfully have things in common, and human beings desperately want that. The science of our bodies and minds is that we want and need that. And whether it is sitting in a comedy show and laughing along with lots of other people who may be very different to you, and very different to the performer, but can still enjoy the joke, which is a release. You get that, and you'll know that better than most of us. You know, you get that in comedy in a much more visceral way than you do in some forms. But no matter what the form is, all of those things are allowing us to be reminded that we are both unique and also just a human being like anybody else, and we can focus too much on our difference. Also, these things they're forcing us to engage in compassion practice.
Yes.
Any story that you read, that you invest in, I talk about this a lot in my classes. You're all very welcome. All of Scotland is welcome to my classes. We talk often about how in a well-written short story, for example, the minute that we forget ourselves, because we know it's made up, we know it's not real, and yet we read on and we get invested. the minute that we do that, we are engaging in empathy and compassion practice.
Mhm.
If you take like a classic Russian short story like Anton Chekhov's In the Cart, which I love, I kind of love it for its ordinariness. It's about this ordinary schoolmistress called Maya in the 19th century in Russia, and I know nothing about the 19th century in Russia. I've never been a woman. There's almost nothing in common between me and Maya, and she's going through on her way on a journey she's taken loads of times. The landscape is dead to her, and she feels like there can be no hope in her life, and by the end of the story she sees the world differently. And Chekhov writes it in such a way as that although it's completely ordinary and common, and you could miss anything about this woman's life that might even seem noticeable, he manages to draw us in to care about us. And if we care about characters, then we have compassion for them, and that brings us closer to them.
What's beautiful about what you're saying is that it's the power of storytelling, really, isn't it? And the way that we share and we connect. And many years ago, I think it was the Princeton University's Neuroscience Institute, they did a study into content, and they were looking at how brains react to content, the brain of a listener and a storyteller. And they found that when someone's sharing facts, information, there's nothing really that they saw, nothing significant. However, when someone was telling something emotive, it caused something that they described as brain coupling. So our brains look the same. So there's this, that feeling of being together, which I love and adore, and I think of quite often when I want to connect with someone new. When you're meeting, boyfriends, parents for the first time, or how can you tell stories? How can you share something? And we should be doing maybe more of that. But I'm thinking, Fiona, about that in context of all the important topics and all the issues and the heaviness that we're seeing in society at the moment, because classically at the Fringe, and you'll know this if you walk down the Royal Mile or anywhere in Edinburgh, you'll see the posters. They tend to reflect, political, social issues. There's lots of big shows. I mean, we've had everything from Gwyneth Paltrow's ski trial to, Liz Truss to, there's everything. Society is reflected in the shows that we see. So is there a responsibility to reflect, climate, politics, gender? Do we have a balance there?
Do we? I don't know. I think we've got a responsibility to tell the story that we want to tell. I think when it becomes too politically driven or too agenda driven, actually we can lose some of the joy of that and some of the storytelling beauty. I think any artist will always reflect something of what they believe. I think you can't produce a piece of art, a piece of comedy, a piece of theatre without expressing something of what you want to say to the world. So yes, you absolutely, and we do address these big things. But I think we've got to think about how we do that in a way that engages and entertains and takes the listener, the watcher, on a journey. So really interesting that Roger mentioned Chekhov, because what Chekhov in his dramatic writing does is he is the master of the subtext. So, you hear these conversations between these Russian people, but actually there's a whole other story going on underneath. And the beauty of watching Chekhov, I think, is you're listening to the story on one level, but you're also you're making the story yourself as you understand what's really happening between these characters. And so there's a lovely line, isn't there, of when I write something, I wrote a play a few years ago called Help Yourself, which was about land grabbing in Zambia. That is not a top entertaining topic for the Fringe. But what we did as a company is we made it funny, and we took it out of the immediacy of the reality of the situation of the lady whose story we were telling. And we told it in a way that made the audience laugh and join in, and there was participation, and it was all quite raucous. But then we're walking that line, because then there are these moments when suddenly we drop and people realise this is a true story. This is a real story. Yeah. This is a real experience. I'm learning something without realising I'm learning it. So there's a subtext to that.
Yeah. Well, whether it has meaning or whether they're there just for a little bit of levity and bringing a bit of joy and entertainment into her life, I am, for one, very grateful that I live in this city during August. So, and I look forward to, of course, having a night out with all of you now at the Fringe. Thank you so much to my guests this hour, Fiona Stewart, Rog Glass and Dr. Jahan Al-Azawi. And that is it for me this week. Thank you so much again to all my guests. And if you've missed anything, please do not forget that you can listen back on BBC Sounds. A last reminder that Connie McLaughlin will be live hosting Sunday morning next week from the Edinburgh Festival with guests including Terry Christian discussing his Catholic upbringing, psychologist and author Vincent Deary on our Breaking Points, and writer-performer Kelly Jones exploring the cost of laying loved ones to rest in her new comedy, My Mother's funeral. On the way, it's the Sunday Show with Fiona Stalker, followed by an afternoon of sport and then music. But I'll leave you with Limited. Bye for now.